community, Tara Russell Slavin. She is the Director of Policy and Community Building at the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center. She works to advance their rights in accordance with the center's mission to build a world where LGBTQ people thrive as healthy, equal, and complete members of society. Welcome, Tara. My question to you is, the struggle against oppression is inseparable from the LGBTQ rights movement. The movement for Black civil rights and the LGBTQ movement, the Pride movement, have always exhibited a certain level of intersectionality. What are your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Pat, for the question. And I'd also like to thank the YWCA for hosting today's town hall and for gathering such brilliant panelists speaking to this pertinent issues of this moment. We are in the midst of June, which is Pride Month and the 51st anniversary of Stonewall. And it's critical to remember that whether it was Stonewall in New York City or Cooper's Donuts that happened nearly a decade earlier in downtown Los Angeles, Black and POC LGBTQ leaders, and specifically trans leaders, have been at the forefront of the battle for LGBT equality. And that many people exist at the intersections of these two communities. And when I think about the events of just the last month, I think there are clear illustrations of progress and very stark examples of just how much work needs to be done. In particular, I think about the fact that in the last 2 weeks, we've learned about the death of two more Black trans women, Dominique Remy Fells and Raya Milton. And in just this last few days, we've learned of two more trans women who have been murdered. And that speaks to the epidemic of violence that is happening. At almost the simultaneous time, 2 weeks ago today, the Trump administration, through the Department of Health and Human Services, published a final rule that rolls back non-discrimination protections that targets the trans community, targets LGBTQ families, targets limited English proficient speakers, and it attacks reproductive justice. And we're a party in a lawsuit that's challenging that rule right now. But I think what's critical about this is that rule was announced in the middle of a health pandemic, right? And goes to sort of the cruel and inhuman nature of who is leading this federal government and the way in which they continue to attack all of us, right? I also think it's important to acknowledge the victories. And one of the most significant is that the Supreme Court a week and a half ago held that Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that sex-based protections under that act for the first time include sexual orientation and gender identity. And we are optimistic that this ruling will help lay the groundwork for expanding LGBT protections across the country. Most people may not even be aware of the fact that prior to this ruling a week and a half ago, it was still legal in more than half of the states in this country to literally fire someone because of how they identified or who they were if they were a member of the LGBT community. But I also think, and I think it's also important to acknowledge when you go back to the prompt of the question, right, that protections is coming under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which has been so central to, the expansion and the fight that Black Americans have had in this country. And it sets, and that it's been this sort of preeminent law that sets the baseline for what is legal equality and what is accepted. But I think there's a really big difference, right, between legal equality and lived equality. And we know that just on a base level, legal equality still doesn't exist for many LGBTQ people, but that gap is particularly the greatest when we're talking about lived equality and talking for LGBTQ community members who come from communities of color. As we're the largest, provider of LGBT social services in the country, we have more than 42,000 clients who visit our sites every month. We provide healthcare. We provide services for homeless youth. We provide services for LGBTQ seniors. And when you look at the social services aspect of this work, what is very clear very quickly is the people who are most at risk, whether it's for contracting HIV, whether it's for experiencing hate violence, the homeless youth we serve, that those are disproportionately Black members of the LGBT community. So all of this to say that at this critical moment, an outcry for justice for Black lives, that this is an important reminder that pride and the work of LGBTQ liberation is more than a celebration, right? It's about pushing and it's about stepping up and it's about fighting for change. And we have to step into that change. And I just really greatly appreciate everyone who's here and the work that has laid this foundation. And, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here and look forward to continuing this fight.
Tara, thank you. And I may add, if people need an example of just how powerful and involved your movement is, I believe, if I'm not misstating, there were tens of thousands of people in Hollywood that marched in solidarity.
Yeah, more than 30,000 at the All Black Lives Matter movement.
Volumes. All right. Thank you, Tara. Now,